Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is Ricardo speaking. I see there are still people joining, so we'll wait 1 or 2 more minutes. Julius, I see your hand raised. Is there any question while other colleagues are joining?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, hello, Ricardo. It's me, Julius. The problem is this: the interpreter is the sometimes interfering with when you are speaking. So it has you can correct that so we can. Those of us in English can only hear you because now it's like we hear Spanish and English at the same time.
Okay, Tanya, I don't know if this can be addressed. I guess clicking in the interpretation link in off would remove other interpretation channels.
Yeah, I did that. I clicked
Okay.
on English. Oh, okay, maybe original audio interpretation of. Okay, yeah, maybe I go with
Okay.
original.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can start. Other colleagues will be joining. Again, my name is Ricardo, and I work as a protection officer for disability inclusion at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. I am the focal point for disability inclusion at the Division of International Protection. This is the second webinar of a series of webinars with the International Disability Alliance on issues related to the mandate of both organizations. So bringing together persons with disabilities and situations of forced displacements, the situations faced by refugees, internally displaced, returnees, asylum seekers, and stateless persons, among others. We have started with a first discussion last Monday on our engagement, both the International Disability Alliance and the UN Refugee Agency, on human rights mechanisms. And today we will focus on the Global Refugee Forum, a very important opportunity that will take place next year for a second time. But before, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Tanya to go through the accessibility features of this call, including interpretation. Tanya, over to you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Dear all, my name is Tanya. I'm going to briefly explain some of the technical features of today's call. This webinar is being recorded. There is international sign interpretation, captioning in English, and language interpretation in French, Spanish, and Arabic language. A CC button on the bottom of your screen will enable the closed captions. If you need captions in the external window, the link is in the chat box. The interpretation button on the bottom of your screen presented as a globe will allow you to access specific language channel. Please choose your channel that you will follow throughout the meeting. The participants do not have an option of opening the microphone and video. Should you have questions, kindly leave them in Q&A section. Our team is monitoring the chat box and will try and respond to questions during the event where possible. We request all speakers to kindly keep to times and keep their cameras if not speaking. We are asking you that you speak slow enough for the interpreters and captioners to follow. Thank you all and have a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tania. This is Ricardo again. I'm going to introduce briefly the panelists for this second webinar on the Global Refugee Forum. And we are going to hear first from Juan Ángel de Gubella, who is the president of the Latin American Network of Organizations of Persons with Disabilities and their families. We will have as well Martel de Briese, who is a senior community-based protection officer at the Division of International Protection. Elham Yousefian, who is senior advisor on inclusive humanitarian action and disaster risk reduction at the International Disability Alliance. And Niklas Saxon, who is senior humanitarian advisor, Unit for Humanitarian Assistance and Policy at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. We will discuss about how organizations of persons with disabilities, refugees with disabilities can get engaged into the Global Refugee Forum. So without further delay, I give the floor to our colleague, Juan Ángel de Gubella. Juan Ángel, the floor is yours.
Hola. Muy bien, buenos días. Buenos días a todas, buenos días a todos.
Good afternoon to everyone.
Es un honor, es un placer para mí estar en esta mañana con todos ustedes para dar estas palabras de introducción a lo que fue el primer Foro Mundial para Refugiados en Ginebra, Suiza. Comentarles un poco de nuestra experiencia. En esta primera cumbre que tuvimos allí en Ginebra, Suiza, fue una gran experiencia en la cual nos enfocamos mucho en el tema de cómo están viviendo las personas con discapacidad la migración, cómo la ACNUR está trabajando este tema, UNHCR, cómo se está trabajando en este tema, enfrentando las situaciones que las personas con discapacidad están viviendo en los momentos en los que están llevando a cabo su migración por diferentes situaciones. Nosotros estuvimos trabajando desde Riadis, estuvimos trabajando también desde AIDA con Elham Yousefian y estuvimos viendo también las situaciones que se presentan frente a salud, frente a protección social, frente a educación y muchas otras situaciones que se viven. La verdad es que la información que se tiene actualmente frente a personas con discapacidad migrantes es muy poca. Este fue un espacio de participación que nos permitió demostrar este tipo de situación y mostrar que se requiere información desagregada sobre la discapacidad en orden de poder cumplir lo que dice la Convención de los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad y atender lo que ellos están viviendo. Aprovechar este tipo de espacios sociales fue de gran valía porque nos sirve para hacer este tipo de incidencia frente a todos los stakeholders, poder trabajar también en diferentes espacios. Sin embargo, para mí como persona sorda fue algo dificultoso debido a que no pude contar con el servicio de interpretación en todos los espacios. Solo estaba con mi intérprete acompañante y en los diferentes otros espacios en los que se daba la información, pues no podía contar con el servicio de interpretación. Así que era muy complicado para mí. Por eso también nos dimos cuenta de la importancia de poder contar con la información no solamente en lengua de señas, sino también en los demás formatos accesibles, para que todas las personas con discapacidad puedan contar con el acceso a la información. Por eso estamos trabajando en red junto con ACNUR, con UNHCR, para que esto pueda ser posible. Esto también debido a las situaciones de migración que se están presentando.
Has to do with migration situation that's going on in Latin America. with the COVID and the
ha presentado un gran
2020 and
reto para todos nosotros.
2021,
Y
it was a
fue
really
ese
great
reto de
challenge
poder
for everyone.
buscar los datos de migración que se están presentando en Venezuela, Colombia, Chile, Nicaragua, el poder unirnos con nuestras asociaciones miembros para conocer los datos de refugiados que hay allí y las barreras que se están presentando para todos ellos para poder acceder a la información, para niños, niñas, mujeres, y que de esta manera busquemos pues también la protección social para estos grupos minoritarios, personas con discapacidad y con esta interseccionalidad que se encuentra en las situaciones que están enfrentando. Es por esto la necesidad de poder trabajar en red y darnos cuenta de los servicios que requieren las diferentes personas con discapacidad. Sin información desagregada va a ser muy difícil saber qué servicios se requieren, cuáles son sus necesidades y qué es lo que está sucediendo. Es por eso que en compañía de AIDA hicimos también esta recopilación de datos acerca de qué está sucediendo y pues esperamos que estos datos, esta información que estamos recopilando, que tengamos, nos sirva para poder dar una visibilización más práctica, más útil de las situaciones que están viviendo niños, niñas, mujeres con discapacidad en cuanto a la accesibilidad que ellos están necesitando y entender que la discapacidad es un asunto transversal, un asunto mucho más amplio que requiere una atención diversa y que de esta manera pues busquemos el poder cumplir con los derechos de las personas con discapacidad pues indicados allí en la Convención de la ONU y que también vayamos en armonía con lo que los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible están mencionando. Que de esta manera demos una real accesibilidad a la información y a los espacios sociales para las personas con discapacidad. Llamando la atención a la situación de América Latina, pues nos damos cuenta de que no solamente es el sur de América Latina, sino que es todo el mundo. Y recordemos también que nuestro lema es no dejar nadie atrás. Y dentro de ese nadie atrás debemos ver esos grupos minoritarios como personas indígenas, como personas con discapacidad y demás que están siendo refugiados actualmente. Esto, para resumir mi participación, es llevarnos a la reflexión, indicarnos que hay un gran trabajo por delante y que ese trabajo que nosotros estamos haciendo de manera aliada con ACNUR, UNHCR, con AIDA, con las diferentes organizaciones internacionales, con la cooperación internacional que está presente en este contexto, pues que pueda ser mucho más práctica, más útil para las personas con discapacidad, para que juntos eliminemos estas barreras y logremos que las personas con discapacidad puedan ser atendidas y también puedan participar de estos espacios sociales. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan Ángel, for bringing this first experience in participation into the Global Refugee Forum in 2019. I have taken already notes on the low level of information on forced displacement and disability, which is one of the key aspects that we are facing in this area. And the low level of engagement as well of groups that are facing intersecting discrimination based on displacements, refugee status, ethnic backgrounds, and disability. The collaboration between the UN Refugee Agency and International Disability Alliance started from that very specific purpose to address this type of issues, and also acknowledging the key importance of participation of persons with disabilities in bringing these solutions. It was noted as well the lack of accessibility in the Global Refugee Forum and the lack of access to reasonable accommodation, sign language interpretation. There has been steps taken for the next Global Refugee Forum, but it will be very important to keep our level of advocacy. So those measures, such as having always captioning in meetings, sign language interpretations in public meetings as well, and doing an accessibility assessment as well to the venue will be kept. Okay, I see Musa with a hand raised. I don't know if it's a question. If it's a question, I would kindly request you to use the question and answer. Okay, and it was a point about the English interpretation. I hope it works better now. The channel was a bit low, so we hope that is now addressed. And well taken on the point shared by Lucy, and we will discuss as well on intersection with women with disabilities. I would like to give the floor now to our colleague Martelt de Brise. I will share the screen now, and she will present on the Global Refugee Forum. We would like first to have an understanding of what is this opportunity about and how you can contribute to it. So we'll be sharing the presentation and just, okay, hoping that, just selecting, sorry, there, and share, hoping that you can see the presentation. Martel, could you confirm?
Yes, I confirm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Over to you, Martel.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ricardo. So this is Martel speaking. I'm the Senior Community-Based Protection Officer within the Division of International Protection at the UN Refugee Agency. So before talking about the Global Refugee Forum, I would just like to take you back to 2018 to the Global Compact on Refugees. So Ricardo, if we could go to the first slide, please. Okay. So the Global Compact on Refugees was affirmed in 2018 by the General Assembly of the United Nations. So the aim of the Global Compact on Refugees was to have a framework for responsibility sharing, but also to have better refugee responses. And that was to be achieved through 4 key objectives. And those are the 4 key objectives that are projected on the screen. The first one is about ease the pressure on host countries. The second is about enhancing refugee self-reliance. The third objective is to expand access to third country solutions. And the fourth one is about support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. So those are the 4 objectives of the Global Compact on Refugees. Apart from the 4 objectives, I would also like to stress that the Global Compact on Refugees recognizes the whole of society approach. So we cannot reach the objectives of responsibility sharing and better refugee responses if we don't work together and if we don't apply the whole of society approach. So if we move to the next slide, Ricardo. This shows a bit of an overview of what we mean by the whole of society approach. So it's a multi-stakeholder and partnership approach. And on the slide, we have listed the different actors that could be involved in a comprehensive refugee response. So it involves governments, refugees, host community representatives, local authorities, international and regional organizations, humanitarian development actors, international and regional financial institutions, parliaments, civil society, faith-based actors, private sectors, but also media, academics, and sport and cultural organizations. So the whole of society approach in order to advance the objectives of the Global Compact on Refugees, the 4 objectives that we just outlined, we really need to work together in a whole of society approach. So moving on to the next slide, we have a picture on the slide that shows the opening session of the Global Refugee Forum. So from 2018, so from the Global Compact on Refugees, I take you now to 2019, the Global Refugee Forum. So on the picture, we see Antonio Guterres in the opening session of the Global Refugee Forum in 2019. Yeah. So the Global Refugee Forum took place in Geneva it was co-hosted by UNHCR and Switzerland, but it was also co-convened by 5 countries that host quite an important number of refugees: Costa Rica, Ethiopia, Germany, Pakistan, and Turkey. So those were the 5 co-conveners of the 2019 Global Refugee Forum. But we also had more than 200 co-sponsors for specific thematics. Could be education, jobs and livelihoods, and so forth. At the Global Refugee Forum in 2019, we also had 3,000 participants, and those represented states. We also had ministers, private sector, development actors, but also refugees themselves. So that's just to give you an idea about how it looked like in 2019 at the Global Refugee Forum. So if we go to the next slide, and I also noted the previous speaker who also indicated the lack of representativity of persons with disabilities. I would just like to stress at least a couple of positive experiences around meaningful participation of refugees themselves at the 2019 Global Refugee Forum. But we also have, of course, lessons learned. So on the screen, on the slide, I have put a couple of points that are positive developments when it comes to meaningful participation of refugees at the Global Refugee Forum. The first point is about regional and country level consultations with refugees and diaspora groups. And they were organized ahead of the Global Refugee Forum in 2019. We also had refugee-led organizations who participated in preparatory meetings to the Global Refugee Forum. We had over 70 refugees who attended the Global Refugee Forum itself, and we had at least 1 refugee co-sponsor for each area of focus of the Global Refugee Forum. Refugee speakers were also included in spotlight sessions, and we had 12 refugee-led organizations that pledged at the Global Refugee Forum. So that's also quite important to highlight. But then when it comes about the lessons learned, is that in order to have refugees participating at the Global Refugee Forum, we really need to start on time, because the visa arrangement, for example, they take much more time, having convention travel documents, for example, obtaining a visa and so forth to come to Switzerland to participate. We really need to prepare well in advance. But even more important is that the identification process of refugees to be invited to the Global Refugee Forum was not as inclusive as we would have liked. For example, as was mentioned, the participation of refugees with a disability was extremely limited. And here I also believe that the support of this network of the International Disability Alliance and the different national organizations is very important, because you could provide indeed a lot of support when it comes to identification, but also coaching of refugees with a disability in order to be better prepared to participate at the Global Refugee Forum. So that's just a little request to all of you online to also support with the process of identification and coaching of refugees with disabilities, with a disability at the Global Refugee Forum. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this slide provides a bit of an overview of the analysis that was done about the pledges. So we looked at the pledges of the Global Refugee Forum in 2019, and we did a bit of analysis based on age, gender, but we also looked through a diversity lens, including specifically, do we have pledges that are disability focused or disability sensitive? And in that regard, we quite have a long way to go, because we only had 7 pledges that focused on disability. And when we looked a bit closer into the pledges, we could find 36 that indicated disability. So disability sensitive, but not focused. Meaning that the majority of the pledges, like 1,357 pledges, had no specific information on disability. So in that regard, we still have quite a long way to go, and probably also a challenge for the group online right now. How can we make pledges more disability focused, more disability sensitive? What do we need to do in terms of advocacy in order to increase the number of pledges that are disability sensitive or disability focused. So if we move on to the next slide. So in addition to the Global Refugee Forum that is organized every 4 years, the Global Compact on Refugees also provides for the organization of a high-level officials meeting. And that high-level officials meeting takes place every 2 years. So we had one last year in 2021. And this year we have the High Commissioner's Dialogue. But last year we had a high-level officials meeting. So the intention of the high-level officials meeting is to take stock of pledges and also to see what is the progress made against the Global Compact of Refugees objectives. You remember the 4 that we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So the slide that we have put on the screen now summarizes the 20 key recommendations from the high-level officials meeting. And I would just like to highlight 4 of those 20 key recommendations. And those are 4 of the 8 cross-cutting recommendations. So the first one is about implementing current pledges and developing new ones to address identified gaps and needs. So we just looked at the analysis of 2019 of the Global Refugee Forum pledges, and we saw that pledges on disability were rather absent, right? When we compared the numbers of total pledges with the focused and the sensitive pledges on disability inclusion, we still have quite a bit of work to do. So that one, we could, for example, reflect on how we could develop new pledges to identify the needs and the gaps on disability inclusion. So the other cross-cutting recommendation I would like to highlight is the 4th one. And this is about making better use of combined humanitarian, development, and peace capacities to achieve the Global Compact on Refugees objectives. And here again, like having this audience today focusing on disability inclusion, some of you have experience working in humanitarian settings, but most of you, I imagine, have experience in development settings. So how can we bring your experience in development or in humanitarian settings to the Global Compact on Refugees or to the Global Refugee Forum? The second cross-cutting recommendation is recommendation number 6, and that's to facilitate more systematic, inclusive, and meaningful refugee participation. So I just mentioned before the importance of identifying and coaching refugees with disabilities. So again, this cross-cutting recommendation is, I think, of great importance to all of us here online today. The last cross-cutting recommendation I would like to highlight is number 7, and that's about enhancing the data available to support effective action and investment in refugee situations. So one of the shortcomings that we have is that we don't have enough data on disability. So disaggregated data by age, gender, disability, and other diversity characteristics. It was mentioned by the former speaker, the importance of looking into intersectionality, right? Women with disabilities, for example. So this is just like 4 of the cross-cutting recommendations I would just like to flag, because I think it's important because we can make a difference together on realizing or advancing those recommendations. So if we move on to the next slide, please. And this is a slide about pledging guidance. So for next year Global Refugee Forum, the 2023 Global Refugee Forum, some pledging guidance was developed. And the following slide, or the slide that is on the screen now, shows the 3 main considerations. So the first one is about pledges should be driven by the 20 recommendations from the high-level officials meeting, but also lessons learned and progress to date. Pledges may include financial, material, or technical assistance. So this is also something that we could reflect on. How, for example, could we share our technical experience working on disability inclusion to other pledging entities to reinforce, for example, existing pledges or to formulate new pledges? The second point on the pledging guidance is to focus on coordinated, multi-stakeholder joint pledges and concrete individual pledges. So pledges can be made jointly by a group towards a common objective, but they can also be made on an individual basis. So maybe also something to reflect on with this network or with all the people online today. How could we work on a common pledge on disability or to advance disability inclusion in refugee settings? And then the third point in the pledging guidance is a distinction between pledges. So we need to make a distinction between pledges, new additional pledges, but also the good practices. So identify good practices like current practical implementation and current examples. And on the website, the public website, the digital platform, on the Global Compact on Refugees, there is also space to showcase good practices. So that's also something that's super important to motivate and inspire other pledging entities on some of the good practices. So if we go to the next slide, please. This one provides 3 points on what is considered a high quality pledge. So a high quality pledge is additional, quantifiable, and needs driven. So when we talk about additional, it is about new support, allocation of resources, or an additional engagement to enhance burden and responsibility sharing. When we look into quantifiable, this includes that the pledge reflects clear timelines, the cost that is involved, but also data on beneficiaries, for example. And the third point to have a high quality pledge is that it needs to be needs driven. So it needs to be aligned with the key recommendations and the Global Compact on Refugee objectives, the 4 objectives mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So what I just would like to stress, coming back to some of the points already mentioned, is that when we develop a new pledge, it is super important that we apply the multi-stakeholder and the partnership approach, right? That whole of society approach, but that we also consult with refugees and affected populations, right? We need to have that meaningful participation. We need to have the opinion, the advice of refugees themselves about the usefulness of the pledge, the need of having that pledge. And of course, to consider age, gender, disability, and other diversity characteristics within our pledge. Are we inclusive when we make a pledge to the Global Refugee Forum? So if we go to the next slide, and we are almost there, about the general information on the Global Refugee Forum. So this slide shows how you could be involved or engaged in the Global Refugee Forum. So stakeholders, including disability inclusion stakeholders, could be engaged in all phases of the Global Refugee Forum. And the first one is, for example, consultations at country, regional, and global levels to take stock and identify key asks for pledge implementation and new pledge development. So consultations are happening at different times of the year, and they are mainly led by the host countries and regional actors. At the global level, for example, we have preparatory meetings that are organized on a quarterly basis. So the first quarterly update will take place in November, the 24th of November, and the second one would be in March next year. So these are different consultations that are happening at different levels, as I mentioned, country, regional, and global levels. The second one is about engaging in Global Compact on Refugee initiatives. And those initiatives, again, they could be regional, they could be thematic, they could be stakeholder-led, for example. Some examples could be the NGO reference group, which is at the global level, but also, for example, the academic interdisciplinary network. That's another example of a GCR initiative, Global Compact on Refugee initiative. And I would also like to mention here the AGD group of friends, the Age, Gender and Diversity group of friends. So that group of friends meets every 2 months And we are currently developing a roadmap that would look into how can we reinforce advocacy on inclusive pledges, taking into account age, gender, and diversity within pledges, but how also could we make sure that we have meaningful participation of refugees in all their diversity at the Global Refugee Forum. I'm very happy also to say that within the AGD group of friends, we have a representative of the International Disability Alliance who could also be the bridge between different discussions that could happen in different fora related to disability inclusion, and bring also that information to the AGD group of friends that it can be considered for the Global Refugee Forum. So another couple of points on how to engage in the 2023 Global Refugee Forum is about the development of high quality joint pledges, right? We talked a bit about a quality pledge in the former slides, but also how could we share better the good practices and the lessons learned that we have. The other way of engaging is about advocacy. And I'm sure that this group around the International Disability Alliance is very strong in advocacy on disability inclusion. And then, of course, last but not least, participation in the Global Refugee Forum meetings, briefings, and different events that will be organized. I think this was the last slide within the presentation, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and then we have a couple of resources that we included that we could share also through the chat and through other means. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm staying with you for any questions you might have. Over to you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Martel. This is Ricardo speaking, and thank you for simplifying the information. It is a very rich information about what happened in 2019 and what happened in 2021 with the high levels officials meeting, and then what is coming next. There are already some questions in the chat that we will keep for later. There some elements have been already outlined on how organizations of persons with disabilities can participate, but we will give a little bit more of examples. And going into that, into some examples for good practice, I would like to give the floor to Elham Yousefian from the International Disability Alliance, as there was a pledge shared by the Alliance at the Global Refugee Forum. And Elham is joining us from the core of the action from Sharm el-Sheikh, from the COP27. Welcome, Elham, and over to you.
Do you hear me well here?
Yes,
Ricardo?
I hear you and see you well. Thank you.
Perfect. I try to hold the phone without moving, but hello, everybody. I am Elham Yousefian. I work for the International Disability Alliance. My role is to coordinate the International Disability Alliance work in humanitarian action, disaster risk reduction, forced displacement, including refugees, also climate action. That's why right now I'm in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, to participate in the COP27 to discuss disability inclusive climate action. So actually, thank you very much, Machtel, for what you just presented, because that made my job much easier to talk about how organizations of persons with disabilities, including refugees with disabilities, can get engaged so that next year in 2023, we have a more inclusive, more participatory, and more accessible Global Refugee Forum. So let me start by explaining what the International Disability Alliance did in 2019. So the International Disability Alliance, as the global network of organizations of persons with disabilities, started engaging with the Global Refugee Forum by the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018. So that goes back to the history that Machtel was just sharing. We helped to develop the guidance for providing pledges. And also we participated in the Global Refugee Forum, including on the panels that happened. We tried to advocate for some of the pledges, and we specifically made a pledge. The pledge, so the pledge is another word for commitment or promise. the promise, the pledge, the commitment that the International Disability Alliance made was that we're gonna use our technical expertise and share our technical expertise to make sure that persons with disabilities and their organizations access capacity development in including refugees and forcibly displaced persons with disabilities. And also we're gonna share our capacity development to make sure that refugee responders, including UNHCR and UN Refugee Agency team and staff, increase and enhance their capacity on inclusion of persons with disabilities. And as Machtel and Ricardo already mentioned, that was actually the start point of the Memorandum of Understanding that was concluded between the International Disability Alliance and the UN Refugee Agency. So we met in 2019 and we concluded the Memorandum of Understanding at the end of 2020. One of the main areas of that Memorandum of Understanding was actually that making this pledge possible and implementing our pledge. So under that, we have concluded many activities, including activities for UNHCR staff. We have helped to prepare the inclusive facilitation handbook that UNHCR has for their staff. And one of the activities that we have right now, you guys are here for this webinar, is part of that collaboration, because that would help you to enhance your capacity about how to get engaged in Global Refugee Forum. And also we do the same for UNHCR staff. And so I want to take the rest of the time. So that's one example of what we could do. So pledge doesn't necessarily need to be about sharing, giving money. Of course, donors need to give money to address the refugee situation, or other organizations can engage in different ways. But the way that we, as organizations of persons with disabilities, can engage are a few ways. Number one, we can make pledges, like the pledge that I just described. So I think global, regional, and national organizations of persons with disabilities can make pledges. The best way, as Machtel said, is maybe to do joint pledges. So for example, different regional organizations, national organizations can get together and make a joint pledge to develop the capacity, to make sure that refugees are included in their work. Our OPDs, you as OPDs are doing great work on the ground. For example, you are working to combat discrimination against persons with disabilities in employment, right? You have an OPD, you're advocating with your government to say persons with disabilities should have access to employment. I'm sorry for the background noise, it's quite unpredictable in here. So you can make a pledge and say that we promise that our work to ensure access to employment for persons with disabilities would include refugees with disabilities as well. That's a pledge that an OPD can easily make. You're advocating for access to education. You can make a pledge and say, we promise that we will include refugee children with disabilities in our work to access to inclusive education. There are many other examples, and if you have time, that's just the first webinar as such. We're going to have more and more opportunities to discuss what you as an OPD can make a pledge. So making a pledge is the first option. The second thing that you can do is to advocate for disability inclusive pledges. Machtel just told us about disability focused pledges and disability sensitive pledges. So there are some pledges that are disability focused. For example, you say, I promise, I make a pledge to make sure that refugees with disabilities have access to assistive technology. You make a number. This is a disability focused pledge. Sometimes pledges are disability inclusive. So for example, or sensitive. So for example, you say, I make a pledge to make sure that 1,000 refugee children have access to education in Kenya. That includes at least 10% of them should be children with disabilities. That's an example of the disability sensitive pledge. So what you can do is you identify your governments, other governments that you're doing advocacy with, and encourage them and advocate with them that make disability focused and disability sensitive pledges. So that's another example that you can do. Especially you can encourage joint pledges. So that's an important thing. So you need to identify those bodies in your country, especially those who are coming from countries that have refugee population. Definitely you can identify those bodies and advocate for disability focused or disability sensitive or both of them pledges. Another area of engagement is to identify and collaborate with refugee-led organizations. I think some of the people that we have on the call are refugees themselves. If you are a refugee with disability, there are refugee-led organizations, which means organizations, NGOs that are established and governed and led by refugees themselves. You can identify them and start to engage with them and ask them to be inclusive of persons with disabilities. That's the best way. I think mainstreaming disability in the work of the refugee-led organization is something that would remove the barriers. All of us know that attitudinal barriers, the bias, the lack of understanding about capacities and rights of persons with disabilities is the source of many of the problems that we face. So engaging with those refugee-led organizations is the best way to remove those barriers. And of course, there would be other activities, as Machteld explained. We have the Asian Gender and Disability Group. We have the NGO reference group that you can engage. You can participate in those consultations that are happening about Global Refugee Forum, especially if you are a refugee with disability. If you are not a refugee with disability, but you know a refugee with disability, please make sure to share these invitations with them. If you are not a refugee with disability, but you are running an OPD, please reach out to refugees in your country, in your area, and include them in these events so that they can learn about the Global Refugee Forum. And of course, again, stay tuned because this is just the start of what we are doing. Thank you very much, and I remain available if there is any questions.
Thank you, Elham. This is Ricardo speaking again. Thank you for giving so clear ideas on how organizations of persons with disabilities, but not only, refugee-led organizations and refugees with disabilities as well on their individual character or opportunities can share and can engage in the Global Refugee Forum. As Elham mentioned, this is only the beginning. We will have many opportunities next year. We have a dedicated line of programming to support engagement of refugees with disabilities. There has been already some opportunities with trainings we did, with briefings around what are the lines of the priority of our collaborations. We have helped to connect with some of our country offices, and I saw a question on that regards, and we will follow up after in the Q&A session. But this is only the beginning. If you are attending this webinar, please stay tuned. We are keeping as well record of the registration, and we will be sharing many other opportunities as well to participate. I would like now to complete this overview of different stakeholders. I would like now to give the floor to Niklas. Niklas Saxon, as I mentioned, is Senior Humanitarian Advisor at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, and he will speak about the member state engagement into the Global Refugee Forum and some of the good practices. Nicholas, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. My name is Nicholas. I'm the Humanitarian Advisor for the government of Finland. And I work on the humanitarian side of things specifically. In 2019, Finland focused especially on inclusive refugee response, protection, and thirdly, on solutions, including self-reliance for refugees. And so today I was asked to talk a little bit about making pledges and what that looks like. And I will talk from Finland's perspective, especially for 2019, and maybe some ideas for the upcoming Global Refugee Forum. I mean, for the upcoming one, Finland sees particular relevance for disability inclusion in the areas of enhancing refugee self-reliance and expanding access to third country solutions, which might be, for example, labor market options. We had here UNHCR's Innovation Fund manager visiting Finland, and one of the things we looked at in general is how refugees could easily access labor markets, including the one in Finland, and how there are new innovative ways that could happen. For Finland, promoting and protecting the rights of persons with disabilities is a long-term priority for us. And this is true for human rights, development policies, and also humanitarian policy. And this is also why one of our pledges was a focused disability inclusion pledge. So looking at 2019, if you look at the website, for example, most of the pledges were made by states, focusing on different things. But this goes to say that it's also a good opportunity, like Elham mentioned, to advocate states for different pledges or joint pledges with states. As an example, Finland pledged to increase the resettlement places we have for refugees in Finland, and we also pledged to raise the level of funding for humanitarian assistance for UNHCR. Lastly, to specifically support disability inclusion in humanitarian action, we pledged to support UNHCR by funding a person to work specifically on disability inclusion. In essence, to provide financial, but also technical support. In Finland, through the government, we have a number of staff positions at the UN every year that we can fund. So there is a budget for that. We had discussions with UNHCR and also internally whether this was a match, and we recognized that this was something important, something that was aligned with our priorities, and we had the resources to make this pledge. And this was a gap also clearly underlined by UNHCR. Then these pledges are made and they're reported against, so they can be in the planning stage, in progress, or fulfilled. In terms of Finland's pledge, the recruitment was carried out and the person is currently supporting disability inclusion at UNHCR. And also it's an opportunity to encourage states to make different pledges, and it's good to note that some states prioritize disability inclusion especially. So maybe these states at least might be more sensitive to making disability inclusive pledges. To end, just a few ideas maybe from the humanitarian perspective. especially on what was mentioned on disability sensitive pledges. In the humanitarian sector, one important trend or effort that is being made is around localization, which means supporting national or local NGOs and giving them more power in general in the humanitarian work, but also so that they receive more direct funding. And I'm thinking this could also be an opportunity for organizations of persons with disabilities. You could encourage states to also include funding for organizations of persons with disabilities. Additionally, sometimes the donor conditions can be very heavy, but there's always new ways of working with organizations of persons with disabilities, for example, through purchasing the services, for trainings or studies or assessments. A second thing I think many speakers already mentioned, but many states are also interested in making pledges relating to meaningful participation and leadership of women and girls. So this is also something where I think most states would be open to include in their pledge also something about including women and girls with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas. And it's interesting to have these examples as well. Many times when we engage into these discussions, there are immediately divided into what is development, what is humanitarian action, and as mentioned as well by Machteld, this understanding that organizations of persons with disabilities may not have an added value because they may only work on development, and understanding that the Global Compact for Refugees is only relevant in contexts that are so-called humanitarian context or related to conflict, etc. What we see from what Nicholas explained is that there is an opportunity as well in host countries, developing countries, which are not directly affected by conflict, to advocate as well for refugees who are in country to access the local labor market, or, for example, for those states to enter into a more disability inclusive resettlement scheme or opportunity, as well changing their international development policy or humanitarian policy to increase the amount of funding or technical support for disability inclusion. All those conversations can happen at the national level, can happen through UNHCR, or can happen as well with relevant ministry lines in social welfare, in labor, in international developments. There are so many entry routes. What you can do is, again, contacting us, being in contact with us, so we can support as well technically on how to raise these pledges. There are some questions. I saw Musa had his hand raised. We are going to start with Q&A now. I'm not sure now the hand was not raised anymore. I hope that Musa is still with us. Musa, would you like still to share a question or a comment? I saw as well that there was a question about the presence of Palestinian refugees among participants. To my understanding, there were no direct participants with disabilities who were refugees, but I don't know if there were other refugees who were Palestinian attending the Global Refugee in 2019. But if you would like to unmute, I think you can request access to the microphone, and our colleague Tanya will help you unmuting. Just giving a few seconds in case. Musa, are you still with us? Would you like to share a question or a comment? Okay, don't hesitate if you would like to raise your hand again. Sorry for, we try to leave all the interventions at the end. There was as well, I will go first to the questions that were written, and then I see that other hands have been raised. We will come to you. And Lucy was adding or suggesting to add as well gender as an intersection for women with disabilities. This is something that needs to be strengthened. One of the issues that we have seen is that many pledges either were considering, so commitments from member states, either were considering diversity factors, gender, age, disability as very siloed approaches, so tackling only one aspect, or in a paragraph mentioning many groups, but without any specific tangible commitment. This is something that we need to work on as well. Just mentioning that in 2 weeks as well, in the 28th of November, there will be another of these webinar series focusing on gender-based violence, displacement, and women with disabilities. So if you are interested, we will share the link as well for the registration, and you will be very welcome, because we would like to link as well that conversation to the Global Refugee Forum. I will go then for Maud. He had as well a question on how we can make sure that persons with disabilities in South Sudan who are refugees are informed, are trained, and able to participate in the Global Refugee Forum. We asking as well to better engage with UNHCR at national level. We have a line of work for next year, and we will be supporting refugees with disabilities engaging in the Global Refugee Forum. So we will share contact details, and if you're interested, we can help as well engaging with national colleagues working for UNHCR. Okay, so I will now give the floor to Ahmed Al-Dihil. If Tanya, you could please give permission to Ahmed to speak so we can hear. I think, yes, he's already unmuted. Please go ahead. Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Please, everyone, select the English channel if you require interpretation. Thank you.
Dr. Ahmed Al-Dakhil
my name is Dr. Ahmed Al-Dakhil from the University of Tikrit, the University College Law. I am a specialist in general law, and I am a university professor, and I have heard closely what have been said by the experts. The experts provided us with very rich information, especially in terms of the inclusion of PWDs in the GCR. But the problem is that awareness amongst the PWDs are a little bit far placed or far from the concept that the UNHCR is attempting to promote. So we need long-term training for people with disabilities in order to voice and defend their own rights so that they'll be able to get it. So there is a gap between the reality and the law, between international conventions and the reality of disabilities in the field. And I propose that the International Alliance of Disabilities would undertake training of a group of experts with disabilities in order to train others who are going to train and communicate and increase visibility of the UNHCR, the alliances, and way of pledges and formulation of pledges. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for such a very powerful statement and as well a direct request. I think it's a very good point. I would like, I don't know, Elham, are you still with us? That's it.
I'm here.
Thank
Do you hear me?
Over to you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and very nice to meet you. Actually, having experts with disabilities on this subject is a very great idea, and we actually did this towards the fellowship program that we have under the disability reference group. So we have a reference group on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action, and under that reference group we have a fellowship program where there are regional fellows and each region, and in your region, actually in the MENA region, we have a fellow. I don't know, George, if George is with us right now, but we have George Khoury from Lebanon, who is acting as the DRG fellow. So our goal was that these fellows are being like trained and grow and their capacity is being developed so they can provide support to OPDs and persons with disabilities at regional level on humanitarian action, including refugees. So we have organized a number of capacity building activities for them during this year, including the current webinar, so that they learn more. Of course, I acknowledge that we need much more. We need a huge, like a pool of experts on different subjects, because the humanitarian subject is a huge and big spectrum. But that's the steps that we have already taken in this regard. We also have the bridge training. I don't know if you have heard about the bridge training, which is a training on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and also on the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a intense training for like 8 days. And then under that, we have 2 modules which are more general. And then we have one specific module on Article 11 on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is, we call it Bridge Article 11, which again, under the same project, gonna take place hopefully throughout the 2023 in 3 regions of the world. One of them will be, of course, in your region. So please stay tuned. Please follow us and follow our emails and communications, and you will hear about that training as well. And there will be more webinars from this process as well that you will be hearing about them. Hopefully you can also participate. Hope that answers the question, Ricardo. But feel free to add if I missed anything.
Thank you, Elham, and that is correct. So the fellow program, the fellowship program, the bridge training are opportunities, and I will post as well in the chat a link to the joint training material that we developed with the International Disability Alliance on inclusion of persons with disabilities under UNHCR mandate. The training package includes different materials, PowerPoints, handouts, etc., that are ready to use. You can as well contact UNHCR at national level, and if you experience issues, we can try to engage and support that contact. I'm putting the link now, and feel free to use the contents. It is addressed both to UNHCR staff, as well any stakeholder working on refugee and disability issues, including organizations of persons with disabilities. But nevertheless, pledges, for example, from member states, pledges from OPDs on supporting capacity building for OPDs on refugee issues are very welcome. So a very welcome input. Julius, I would like to pass the floor to you now, if you would like to do an intervention as well. Over to you. Julius? Can you hear us? Are you with us?
Hello?
Yes, I can
Yes,
hear you.
yes,
Go.
thank you. Thank you, Ricardo, for giving me the floor. First, I would like to thank you for the opportunity and thank the selection committee that recently selected me as one of the board member of organization led by displaced and stateless person to the advisory board of UNHCR. For this, I would like to point a few things out. I myself, I am here as the board chairman of Newcomers with Disability in Sweden. It's a refugee-led organization based here in Sweden. I was one of the few disabled refugees that participated in the 2009 Global Refugee Forum. But it was good that I was there, but I would like us to improve, to really not just inviting us there, but give us a visibility role, because when we went there, we just had our stand and give flyers, but all the speakers and the activities, there was no really engagement at a high level with refugees with disability. So that could also help giving us visibility, and people see that we are part of it, and it could also inspire others to be to come. And I also want to point the fact that if these three people, hypothetically, that I'm going to say, you have three, one is a woman, another one is LGBTQ person, and the other is a disabled person. If three of them cross the border to seek for asylum, the two will have a reason, but a person with disability, he might have a little bit of humanitarian, which most of the cases not, because I work also here and I've seen things, I've seen people deported on wheelchair. So I would like us to try to see how we can advocate that disability can become a reason for asylum as well. Why not? So those are my key concerns that I would like to raise in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Julius, for bringing those relevant aspects. I will give a first answer and then pass the floor in case other colleagues, other panelists would like to answer. As mentioned by Elham, we will have a line of work starting from today, well, continuing from today because it started time ago, to support meaningful participation in the Global Refugee Forum. Martel, can maybe, if I can tag you, Martel, to give more, a little bit more of information on the task team on meaningful participation and what is the work, and if colleagues would like to map their organization as well. And then I will come back to the question on refugee status because it's a very important one. Can you take the floor, Martel?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Ricardo. So this is again Martel speaking from UNHCR. And Julius, very nice to virtually meet you. And indeed, very happy also that you are on the advisory board of organizations led by displaced and stateless persons. So that's an advisory board to UNHCR that has recently been put in place. So that advisory board is linked to an interdivisional task team that brings together different parts of UNHCR that is focusing on advancing meaningful participation of organizations led by stateless and forcibly displaced persons. So within that task team, we work on developing guidance. For example, guidance that has been developed on participation in the refugee coordination model, but also, for example, a checklist on making sure that when we organize global events, that we take into account age, gender, and diversity considerations, and that we facilitate that meaningful participation of refugees. Within the interdivisional task team, we also worked on the development of a grant agreement, which facilitates direct access to funding provided by UNHCR to organizations led by forcibly displaced or stateless persons. So that's also one of the deliverables of the task team. But what I think is super important also for, the subject that we are discussing today is that the advisory board would also advise the team working on the Global Compact on Refugees and the preparation of the Global Refugee Forum on how to make sure that whatever is developed leading up to December 2023, because that's when we will have the Global Refugee Forum, that there is meaningful participation, inclusion of refugees within that process. So that would also be one of the tasks of the advisory board, to make sure that that information passes and that you can provide direct advice to UNHCR on how to facilitate this, for example. So that's another example. What we also are doing now, and that's not about focusing on organizations led by displaced or stateless persons, but individual refugees that would have a specific expertise, for example, on solutions, for example, on gender, for example, on disability, or specific experience working on livelihoods and health, for example, to identify those individual refugees so that they could be associated and also provide advice, participate in events leading up to the Global Refugee Forum. So it is about the advisory board that provides advice on making sure that the whole process is inclusive and that we have meaningful participation, but it's also about individual refugees that would be associated and play an important role. So for example, this is again where this group could provide support, like how could we identify the right persons to talk on behalf of persons with disabilities, and ideally a person with lived experience being displaced and being a person with disability, but also to make sure that that person is at ease talking in public, for example, so that coaching that also would need to accompany that whole process. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea about different processes working through that interdivisional task team and the advisory board that recently has been established, but also the identification of individual refugees that could also help shape the Global Refugee Forum next December. I hope that this was clarifying a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Martel. And for information, sorry for the very long link, but I shared the link on the work of this task team. And there is a tool at the end where you can map out your organization. So in particular, very interested if it's a refugee-led organization, and more even if it's inclusive or led by refugees with disabilities as well. Do not hesitate, because that can help as well to identify these organizations and engage them during the Global Refugee Forum. I would like as well to give again an opportunity to Musa, as there was no opportunity, but no, sorry, before coming to that, the second part of Julius' question, disability as grounds for refugee status. This has been a key aspect on the work of IDA and UNHCR. There was a gap identified since already the beginning of the collaboration through requests from operations, individual cases that were arriving to us on how disability actually performs into a refugee asylum procedure, and wrangling from access, so equal access to refugee status determination or country asylum procedures, in terms of, for example, receiving support and reasonable adjustments during the process, but as well how the claim and the example that Julius made could consider disability as a factor for the claim and even for grounds of persecution in certain cases, to then what happens with refugees with disabilities who would like to access benefits for persons with disabilities in country or for refugees and are finding barriers. So we wanted to explore the whole interaction of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and refugee law. It's very ambitious, but we have started doing some work. Next Monday, there will be a webinar on that aspect, and I will share the link as well. We are working on a background paper that will be published as well, and you can use to explore the issue. And ideally, it is something that takes time because it needs in-depth discussions. At country level, there would be issues of law reform. There will be many aspects that need to be discussed. But again, it's a very good opportunity for you to share pledges, to advocate with member states to work on that line as well. I would put the link in the chat. And in the meantime, if Musa would like to take the floor as well, very briefly, we have a few minutes and there are still some questions that we will try to address. Musa, if you can unmute or communicate with us. Musa, are you still with us? I can't hear you. I saw other comments on working with Humanitarian Lebanon issues on access for Palestinians with disabilities. I don't know if our colleague Tanya could give the floor for Musa.
Yes,
please
now
go ahead. Please go ahead.
Hello. I am now online. Okay. I am مرحبا. أنا نعم أسمعك. أنا الدكتور موسى شرمفيل.
My name is Dr. Musa Sharamfil. I am the head of the Association of PWDs in Lebanon, and I am a representative of the DPI in the Arab region. I have some questions. I provide services to PWDs from Syrian nationalities, Iraqi nationalities under the auspices of the UNHCR. But I fear that there are many Palestinians inside the West Bank who are refugees in the West Bank, and also Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. And those who are responsible for the Palestinian refugees are the UNRWA, but the UNRWA is falling behind, especially in terms of the PWDs who are those who are intellectually challenged. I wanted to focus on the challenges, the challenges facing Palestinians with cognitive or mental disabilities. Most of those people are coming from very poor family, and they are facing major challenges in accessing any kind of assistance from the UNRWA, those who are mentally challenged from Palestinian nationalities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for highlighting as well the link with our work with UNRWA. We can help to establish links as well with the disability team. There are aspects on representation and experiences, good practices from the region as well on engaging persons with intellectual disabilities, and in particular as well into education activities. I think we will follow up this bilaterally. I wanted to give, we have only 3 minutes left, and acknowledge the questions that we have in the Q&A. It's a session in WASH and disability inclusion and humanitarian response. If this is an interest, we can consider it for next year if it's an interesting aspect. Work in Kenya as well to focus on resettlement, disability. There is information on disability and resettlement that is available as well, and I will share a link to that guidance. Of course, What is needed is action, and that only can come with commitment from member states. That is a very, very challenging aspect as well, because resettlement is not a right, it's only a tool, right, to ensure the protection, and it's very challenging to, if there are no member states engaged in ensuring resettlement opportunities, as Niklas was mentioning. And then the engagement, if a country is not has not adopted the Refugee Convention, how could OPDs contribute to participating in the forum? My quick answer would be, no one can prevent your participation in the forum, and one of the objectives can be advocating, right, for recognition of the Refugee Convention. But this is something as well that we can follow up bilaterally. I would like to give the floor quickly to Martel and Niklas. Elham had to apologize, had to leave. But if you would like to share in 30 seconds, just a last thought based on the conversation we've had. Martel, if you would like to share quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I just would like to thank everybody online for engaging in this discussion. And I also feel like the motivation to work more on having pledges that talk about disability inclusion, and I feel a bit of an appetite to develop a joint pledge on disability inclusion. This being said, it would also be super important to look into how you could work together with other pledging entities to have that matching of pledges, right? So it's not just about new pledges, but it's also about what is the different expertise that we can bring together. Like it could be that the donor country is providing financial support, but for example, could organizations of persons with disabilities bring the technical support, the know-how, the connection with the national structures in a given country? So that matching of pledges, I think, is also super important. But what I feel is that there is appetite and there is engagement and motivation to see more disability inclusion in the next Global Refugee Forum. So I would just like to thank you for that. And I hope that this discussion will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martel. And Niklas, if you could share as well a quick reflection.
Thank you very much for being able to participate in this interesting discussion. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening right now, and especially humanitarian organizations and UNHCR are working a lot on making disability inclusion a reality. So there's a lot of opportunities also for you to try to influence different organizations, states to do this. At the same time, it's important to also know that this is not a priority for all states. So there's kind of both things happening at the same time. And I hope that for the Global Refugee Forum, we can really make a few concrete pledges. We saw the numbers by Martel. Those need to go up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niklas. And with this, I will close the webinar, as well as acknowledging the work of the Secretariat IDA in organizing all the interpreters, the sign language interpreters. Thank you, everyone. Please take the links that were shared in the chat. There are as well an upcoming session next Monday on the intersectionality of refugee law, stateless law, and disability, and in the upcoming week on GDD. And finally, we will have a session on the 5th to discuss everyone together and shape next year, okay? Thank you so much, and we hope to find you in our next webinars. Thank you.